So your client is the San Francisco County government, and they're currently considering a renovation to the international terminal and the SFO airport. And they've kind of been looking around at these top-ranked airports around the world, like Singapore, Tokyo, Korea, and they think that they have a lot of work to do in kind of making their terminal more attractive for travelers. And so they've called you in to kind of figure out, does it make sense for them to actually go through with this renovation?
Okay. Okay. Great. So let me just ask some clarifying questions. You're saying our client is the San Francisco government, that they're considering a renovation for the SFO international terminal, so just the international, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then they've looked at a couple of models with other companies, and then they want to build a more attractive international terminal, and then they want to see if it makes sense financially. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so I just on the objective side, by more attractive, what do you mean by making this terminal more attractive? Is it more attractive in terms of more more visitors that goes into San Francisco, or is there a metric that we're targeting?
Yeah, so I guess there a couple of the specific ideas that they're toying with are, including a gym in the airport and like having a small like movie cinema. A couple of things that they think that travelers would enjoy doing if they were at the airport.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. And okay, that makes sense. So I guess from my perspective, if it makes sense financially, I'm thinking about what can the San Francisco government gain as well as the SFO terminal gain versus what does it cost for them. So I'm thinking about what can they gain if they have a new gym or movie cinema. So then I need to understand what are their kind of if we're optimizing for financially, what are their revenues, avenues for revenue. So I'm thinking about perhaps for the terminal itself instead of the airline. So they're not airlines. I'm guessing their revenue mostly derives from a lot of these things, right? The entertainment, the restaurants that they offer, as well as say United Club, club services. So am I on the right track on that, or?
Yeah, that's perfectly correct. So they do make a little bit of money per flight that kind of docks at their gates, but the majority of money that the SF government makes from the airport is from kind of kickbacks on the different restaurants or other facilities that are allowed to be at the airport.
Okay, gotcha. So just to piggyback on what you just said, you're saying the majority is on the kickbacks. So can you give me a revenue breakdown on currently what is the revenue from the flight docks versus the kickbacks?
Yeah, so on the flight docking, the charge is $2,000 per flight.
Okay.
That docks in the airport per hour.
Okay.
And typically the flights will be docked about 3 hours before they turn around.
Okay.
And so they're only paying for the docking time. They're not paying for actually like taking off and landing. It's just the amount of time they're stationed at the dock.
Sure.
And then in terms of restaurants and facilities and things like that, typically there's kind of two revenue sources. So one is on rent. So rent is about a typical shop. We'll say that they're all kind of roughly similar size. They'll get about $10,000 in rent per month.
Okay.
And then on top of that, generally they'll have deals with these retailers that they'll make like 2% on each purchase.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a great deal. Okay, cool. I'm thinking, how about let's kind of take a quick break here on what we've done so far. I think it's a good break. So, any insights, anything you would have done differently?
I was thinking maybe like first find out what kind of renovation they want to make, find out total cost. So currently, I think firstly you should find out how many passengers come to the international flight per day, in the international terminal per day. Figure out how much revenue you make per passenger per day, right? Then see how much is the fixed cost, the initial cost of actually setting up these renovations, and then figure out per day how much extra is it going to cost you, and then figure out is it the extra increase in passengers that you're going to get, is it worth it or not? I was thinking of it in that way.
Okay, so you're thinking of more analyzing the terminal profit in terms of the per passenger.
Per passenger.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, revenue cost. So another thing that might need a follow-up question on which metric to use, which is the question you asked, and you said profit is what time scale are we looking at? Because there's going to be fixed costs and variable profits.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Good point. Again, don't record this. Yeah. That's right. Well, okay. So, any other comments, or we can continue? Any questions?
So I like how you ask questions, like clarifying questions before diving into that. I think that's a good approach.
You're right. Yeah. I guess for me, from my perspective, when he said make the terminal more attractive.
Yeah, that's very qualitative.
It is. I did not understand what is that, and then whether it makes sense. I did not understand. Is it financially making sense? Or
Yeah, it was a little vague. So I broke it down like quantitatively. Would if you the predicted increase in passengers that you would get if you made your facilities better, the per passenger revenue that you get, is it gonna be worthwhile the per passenger cost?
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I thought of it.
Okay. All right.
And another thing is like airports are like more of like a public facility, so I think it's like a lot of like qualitatively, like if you're gonna like build a park, for instance, you might not be able to quantify that financially.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with airports, because airports are a public facility. So you could also maybe sort of like go into like a more less quantitative side.
Yeah, I think that was a good point. I think that's probably why Jackie asked like, what do you mean by makes sense? And so, yeah, I think when I clarified that it's more of a financial motive, then it kind of makes more sense to just kind of focus on dollars and cents. But I think that's definitely a good point that you mentioned. Like a lot of times when you have these kind of cases where the client is like not a company but like a government, a lot of these kind of other considerations will come into play other than just dollars and cents. Yeah, that's a good point.
Exactly. For the sake of time, we'll continue.
Mm-hmm.
And all right. So where were we? Okay. So it seems like that here are the vast majority of our revenues. Again, I wanted to kind of drill a little bit deeper into, you said the vast majority is from restaurants and facilities and these kickbacks. Mm-hmm. So do we know kind of percentage-wise, is this 80% of the total revenue, or is it, what is it?
Yeah, so currently that's about 80% of the revenue
Okay.
coming from those two sources.
Okay, all right. So because that the vast majority of the revenue is from the kickbacks, restaurants, facilities, I would like to target that first. And my hypothesis here is that if we're able to increase kind of the revenue on the restaurant and the facility side, that we can increase the overall revenue with whatever renovations that we have. Okay, so I guess from my perspective is with these new renovations, I want to understand in terms of financially, I want to put a model still for the profit for the terminal, and then I want to say the profit that we're getting is the increase in the revenue versus kind of the cost of these renovations. Mm-hmm. So given this, I would like to think about a couple of things, right? So on the revenue side, giving our model on focusing on the restaurants and facilities, how can we increase the revenue? Is if we do these renovations, I'm guessing that we can increase our rent per month potentially, or perhaps we can have a better deal and get more purchases. Or with these renovations, perhaps we'll be able to add more venues and to offer these rents in these restaurants in other facilities, kind of increase the number of spots that we can rent out. So those are the things I'm thinking about. So let me tackle that a little bit more. So again, let me break it down into, I'd say, let's say the price that we're getting in terms of how much we're charging for these facilities, as well as kind of the volume, which is how much do we have, okay? So if we do these renovations, do we know will there be an increase in kind of the rent or increase in purchase or anything like that?
Yeah, so the idea right now is actually not to change any of the existing facilities or restaurants, but to add these new kind of gym and movie cinema, and we've kind of looked at some engineer mock-ups, and it seems like it's feasible to do the renovation in a way where we'll be able to keep all our existing facilities and just add these on top.
Got you. Okay, from my understanding is that basically as I kind of piggyback what I previously, you're saying that we'll be able to add new facilities, basically.
Yeah.
That generates something along these lines.
Yeah, we imagine that the amount of the 10K per month and the 2% per purchase will be very similar.
Okay, great. So in that case, this is how I'm thinking about it, right? So you gave me a great hint that our renovations would be kind of increasing our capacity. Then I'm thinking about this profit would be, what would be the revenue that we'll get with the increased capacity, minus kind of the cost of creating this capacity for other, for businesses, right? So I'd say on the revenue side, I want to focus on kind of, do we know how many more restaurants and facilities that we'll be able to open with this renovation?
So it'll be, let's say it'll be 3 new facilities. It'll be kind of 2 gym/athletic facilities and 1 movie cinema.
Okay, so you said one cinema and 2 gyms. Okay, okay, and then and the price that we're charging for these businesses will be very similar, right? Then okay, so that makes sense. Then in that case, kind of we can rent out for $30,000 a month in terms of the rent, but then I want to understand more on the purchase side. So we have an estimate on kind of what is their monthly purchase dollars that we can multiply by the 2% to get the second part of the revenue for these new renovations.
Yeah, so actually the government is not really sure what kind of they can expect in terms of the purchase side, and they were wondering if you had any ideas of how they might be able to come up with an estimate of how many gym users or movie cinema goers there might be in a given month or day or whatever.
Okay. So from my perspective, I want to kind of size the market for these 3 facilities. Do you want to kind of make a quick stop?
Yeah, actually, I think this is a good time to make a quick stop. Any questions or comments at this point?
No.
We really need to be strategic with the board space, don't we?
Yeah, this is a little bit tough.
I mean, I think in an actual interview, you won't actually be working on a whiteboard.
Oh, you don't?
You'll be like writing down on paper.
Yeah.
It'll be on sheets of paper.
Is there like a specific order in which like you should ask these questions? Because I noticed how you like went on like a direct branch and like you got into specifics, but you never like actually asked about how much it would cost to make these renovations, which is like probably a very big like important piece of information. Like, is it better to go like along a specific branch, like asking questions related to like a specific subject, or is it better to get like the top level information first and then work your way down?
Do you want to chime in on that one?
I think in this case, like if you're saying should we tackle the cost side first or the revenue side first, I think it doesn't really matter because we're definitely going to need both pieces of information. And I'd say they're both equally important. So in my mind, there's not a huge difference which one you go to first.
And then I think what he asked is, should we kind of go head down into revenue without asking anything about the cost, or should we kind of ask the top level for both of them before going? I'd say I've seen people do both, and then for me personally, I like to go deeper down because kind of I want to understand if we open these 3 new facilities, how much more revenue we can get, and then I can ask, okay, what is the cost for the government side on creating these 3 new spaces? So, and I think I got some of the top level information from asking just the revenue itself. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
And also to add on to that, it also can depend on the situation of the case. So like, for example, with the profitability, right, you're supposed to look at revenue and cost, but then like your interviewer might just say, oh, revenue has been constant like throughout our period, even though profitability has declined. Then you know, okay, there's no point in going deep into revenue. So it can also depend on the situation.
Okay. All right. Yeah, for time's sake, let's continue for a little bit, and we can ask questions in the end. Okay, so the question now is, what is kind of the estimated traffic towards these 3 new facilities? Before I go into that, one of the things I'm hesitant about is that the only thing I'm worried is that I could do a market sizing in terms of kind of the total traffic that we attract on every given hour. Say per hour, and then we could say airports run 24 hours, and then multiply it that way. The only caveat I'm a little bit confused about is say if the capacity of our airports the number of passengers that come in have not changed, then routing our customers into these 3 new facilities would mean taking away our customers from the previous facilities, which would not affect the rent revenue side, but it would decrease our purchase revenue side. Do you understand my concern there?
Yeah, that's a totally valid concern. I think that's a great point, and we kind of looked at that already, and we saw from some of the other airports that tried to implement these facilities that there tended not to be too much cannibalization, that it tended to be that the customers who were going to those new facilities would not have otherwise been going to any other facility where they would have been spending money.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Okay, so in that case, let me go through kind of a market sizing. So the way I think about it is, can I assume these three facilities are open 24/7?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I want to size how many passengers might go into these facilities. And it's a very tough sizing, but I'd like to think about it as within a day, how many, okay, so let's start with a day, right? So within a day, how many passengers are roaming around how many unique passengers are roaming around in the SFO International Terminal, right? So I'd say, okay, so that's the number of passengers per day. And then I would say times kind of 30 days a month that they'll be using our facilities. And then I want to think about it, okay, what is the percentage of these passengers who will be going to one of the three? And I'm just going to lump it all together for simplicity's sake. So I'd say percentage of passengers that enter one of these. And then I would say once we have that, we can multiply it on the percent. And then I would say times, okay, rather space, percentage of, times kind of the spending per customer, right? So dollars spent per customer that enters one of these facilities. So if we kind of do this, I think we have a good understanding on the dollar spent, and we can later on multiply by the 2%, figure out what is our revenue for the SFO terminal. Does that sound like a good method to you, or?
Yeah, it sounds like a perfect method.
Okay, great. Well, I do need some expertise here because I have no idea how many passengers a day come into SFO International. Do you have some data on some of these?
Yeah, so typically we'll have about 200,000 passengers per day going into SFO.
Okay.
Into the international terminal specifically.
Great.
And are there any other data points you would?
All right, and from my understanding then, okay, I need to know what is the percentage of those that enter either one of the three new facilities. I'm guessing it won't be much, probably along like 1 to 2%, maybe even less, but do we have like an estimate on the official side on that?
Yeah, so based on some of the airports that have already implemented this, it turns out that it's roughly about 5% of passengers end up using these facilities.
Okay, so it's a little bit more. So let's just, considering that SFO is the major international terminal, our renovations have been really good. I've been to both of these international terminals. They're not really better than SFO. So we'll assume that we'll attract the same amount of customers. And then at 5%. And then so in terms of dollars spent per passenger, I think that really goes back to kind of their pricing schemes. Do we know how much they price like per entry or things like that?
Yeah, so typically airport gyms and movie cinemas will charge about $20 per person that comes in.
Okay, so I'm thinking about it. In this case, it won't be kind of, the dollar spent per passenger, let's just assume it's $20 based on what you said. Okay, and then times kind of 30 days a month. So I think with all that, we can assume, I have a pretty good assumption on, and then, okay, the only caveat is I think, let's multiply it by 3 because we have 3 facilities. This would be a good approximation of what is going to be the total revenue purchase for these 3 new facilities, which would be, okay, so it would be 600,000 times 5%. So that's going to be 30,000 times $20. That's 600,000 again. Okay, I guess these two can be equal to 1, and times 30. That's 18 million bucks. That's 18 million bucks for the total of the 3 facilities in terms of their purchases, right? And then I want to multiply that again by 2% in terms of our revenue as the government. So that 2% times 18 million is 360,000. That's kind of our revenue per month that we're getting from offering a capacity on the purchase side, and plus the 3 $30,000 of rent. So for a total, just for simplicity's sake, that's $390,000 a month of total revenue. Does that sound like a pretty reasonable number to you?
Yeah, I think that sounds very reasonable.
Okay, let's stop here for a little bit. Any questions?
I think I'm going to say no, that does not sound reasonable.
Yeah. So if you make a kind of very egregious math there that'll kind of throw the estimates off, sometimes it actually will be nice and say, oh, do you want to just check that calculation? But in this case, everything you did seemed reasonable. So
if you don't ask, will they stop you? See, or do you you should keep checking?
I think it's a good idea to ask. I mean, they might stop you or they might not. So you definitely won't get penalized, I don't think, for asking them, does this seem reasonable or something like that. So I think it's always in your interest to do that.
I wonder, so for a sanity check, I heard no matter what number you get, you kind of have to provide a sentence to justify why this number you think is reasonable.
how would you do that?
You mean this last number of $390,000 a month?
Yeah, and that's just to make sure the interviewer know that you're doing the
The
sanity
sanity
check.
Yeah, from my personal perspective, I'd say this would be very difficult because we don't have a basis. So I think one of the
Yeah.
things I always think about is kind of you want to compare it to, say, the other terminals. So if they had gave you data saying, okay, Singapore and Korea, for one of their facilities, they get about $100,000 a month. Then you can say, okay, compared to that, we have 3. Now that's kind of quadruple the amount, so it's just about the same. But then if you don't have that, I'd say.
Just ask it, do you think it's reasonable?
Yeah, and I did that in the end, right?
Yeah,
It sounded like a
yeah.
reasonable number. And I guess, I would always just make sure, it's just to game the interviewer. You want to make sure that the interviewer agrees to your assumptions. Once he agrees to your assumptions in your method, then it's just pure math, and if you don't make any errors on the math, then
Yeah.
the interviewer cannot disagree with you on this.
Got it.
Right. And just to add on what Varun said, one of the things I always like to do is before going into these numbers is to ask, after I have like a more qualitative generic formula, to ask, does this formula look good to you? Because I don't want to kind of write this, not confirm with him, go down all the way to 390,000, and then the interviewer is saying, okay, this assumption is bad. Then you have to spend an extra 2 minutes kind of to adjust that. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
I feel like it just sometimes, I think there were several times I got asked, do you think this is reasonable, when it's actually reasonable, and then they want me to justify that, and I would just like panic and think, oh, what did I do wrong? And then later they were like, oh no, it's just to see if you're doing sanity check at all. So I don't know, that's kind of hard, kind of.
Right. Let's talk about a little bit more towards the latter part in the end, okay?
Okay.
Because we're running a little bit less time. So I guess, so just wrap up in the final 5 minutes. Okay, so it seems like monthly, if we roll out these 3 new facilities, we'll be getting $390,000 new of revenue. And then, does this make sense or not financially for the SFO and terminal? I think about it, okay, so they will generate this new additional revenue without cannibalizing the previous revenue from all the other facilities. Then I'm thinking about, okay, what is the cost of renovation providing these 3 new spaces? So and I like to think about it, when I think about this renovation, I think it's a one-time, upfront cost, and that perhaps needs a little bit of maintenance every year, every month, but I think the vast majority should be one-time upfront. So do we have a cost breakdown on kind of the fixed cost and the variable costs associated with this venture?
Yeah, so I think your assumption is completely right that the fixed costs are going to completely dominate the variable costs. And so the fixed cost for this will be $500 million, is what we're expecting.
Okay. That's a lot of money. $500 million. So what about variable costs? We just assume it's none?
It's pretty negligible by comparison.
Okay, that makes sense. So it seems like on a fixed cost perspective, a $500 million investment would give us $390,000 of extra revenue a month. In terms of, I want to convert this into a revenue per year times 12, and then this would be 3.9 million. So this is going to be about 4.7 million. Just about. Let's just round for the simplicity. Let's say it's $5 million of extra revenue per year. So in that case, it takes about, without considering the time value of money, it takes about exactly 100 years for this to break even. And then, what I think about this is, if this is, I don't want to say if it's a good thing or bad thing. I want to kind of put it into perspective on what are some of the other ventures. Do we know as SFO, because I know that as a government or as a terminal that they have kind of some rate of return standards that above which they'll go with a project, below which they will not. So is 100-year break even, or say perhaps you could think about it like a 1% return? Is that reasonable for the terminal or not?
So they seem to think that it's not reasonable. They think anything beyond like 10 years would be kind of too much for what they're willing to stomach.
Okay, well in that case, so if they're looking for perhaps a 10% return on investment on a year-to-year basis. So in that case, given everything the rigorous analysis that we've done, it seems like that it will take 100 years to break even, and it's I don't think there's a reasonable method to bring it down to 1/10 of that, which is 10 years. So given that, I would recommend that the government not proceed with this venture just on the pure financial basis and on its target for return on investment. So that would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. that's kind of just how it is. Any more questions for the last part?
How long should the conclusion be, like recommendation?
Pretty short. I think
Usually it's like a yes or no, I would think. I mean,
a little more than a yes or no, but yeah, pretty succinct. Like
no, for this one, in essence, the
But you
essence
should-
was yes or no.
At least summarize what you have done to like
Oh.
to get that yes or no.
yeah. So I think starting with yes or no is a great way to start the summary. Say like, no, we should not. No, the SFO should not pursue this expansion because we've shown that it'll take a 100-year payback period, which seems much longer than they're willing to take. So it can be very short, but yeah, probably not just a yes or no.
Okay. Yeah.
So you stated a hypothesis at front, so you need to justify why that is true.
The hypothesis that if we are able to increase revenue on these two parts, that we'll be able to solve the whole problem.
Yes, or do you just assume it?
I think it's a very subtle science of human communication. Whereas I'm getting cues from the interviewer on what he wants. So I'd say in a real interview, if the interviewer kind of just says, yeah, that's a pretty good assumption, that's a pretty good hypothesis, I would just roll with it and not think too much about it. Whereas if kind of in the end, I got this part back, and then say if we have extra time at the end where the interviewer said, is there anything else you want to tackle, or is there an assumption that you made previously that, and the interviewer will ask that you kind of want to justify or adjust, then I think about, okay, did I make some assumptions I need to go back to? So it kind of depends on a case-to-case basis, I'd say. Yeah.
And just to add on to that, I kind of picked these numbers like intentionally because there's kind of I think something like the 80-20 rule, where like if you focus on what drives like 80% of revenue, that's probably more worthwhile. So I think it was like definitely a very reasonable thing to say. Let's just focus on that.
Yeah.
Then the question is, right now you've been only focusing on the old existing business models. So do you want to, at the end, propose like new ways that we can make money out of this?
I'd say yeah. So I'd say in a real interview, I would have given the final recommendation a lot more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I did it just for the simplicity's sake and considering time. What I would have done would be, usually what I do. Okay, so it seems for 100 years, then I would ask, say, can I take some time for a final recommendation, right? And then during the 1 minute I have, I would kind of prepare to answer this as well as answer one or two extra ideas I have to either break this down to 10 years or something else to boost revenue. So I'd say a little bit more complex, but not especially, yeah.
So in the beginning, you were provided with information that Singapore and Korea terminals had already done this, and like if they were like possibly similar numbers, like would you have to justify why like your number seems so unreasonable and like it doesn't seem like you would do it versus like you ask some questions about the other international terminals because you were given that information.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. Like, I think that would have actually been like a really nice add to this. I think this was a really phenomenal performance. But like, I think like once you got this number, like, oh, this would be like a 100-year buyback. That seems unreasonable. I wonder why like those other places would have done it, and then maybe ask a little bit about that. That would like, assuming you had more time and stuff like that. I think that would be like something that would really indicate that you're paying attention and you really understand what's going on.
Do you think so? Generally, the interviewer just makes up numbers, or is that?
I'd say, to be honest, I'd say the interviewer has like a list of numbers that are facts. And then the interviewer would try not to make up numbers on the spot because it'll be tough for them to go back and justify the numbers they made up. Yeah. So what they do is if it's an avenue that they don't want to go into, they'd say, we don't have any numbers on that.
Okay.
Or let's focus on the other part. So they won't make up this number on the spot. I think you did, right? For the 80-20 order.
That only did.
Yeah. So cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a final question. So, do you usually consider, let's say, the multiplier effect of like things that change? For example, it will actually create I don't know what you call it, either a network effect or a multiplier effect that it's actually scaled rather than just linear.
For what analysis?
For let's say let's say revenue, like it's not only affecting what you have changed, but also the existing businesses. So it actually will create like let's say like 1.2 amount of revenue rather than just one.
Okay. I'll just answer. Yeah. So definitely you can voice the concern, but I think what I did was I asked Varun in the beginning, say if this will cannibalize the existing business, and the Varun said basically it's agnostic, it's independent basically. Okay. And then it's add on top. right? So, and I guess you could say would be even more. So the compounding effect will benefit both of them even more than the sum of their parts. And you can ask that, but I just did not assume that.
So also in the beginning, they said you were told that you're trying to make the international terminal more attractive. So I'm not exactly sure how increasing increasing revenue in 3 new businesses makes the terminal itself more attractive if it doesn't bring in new passengers. Would you have to consider like, oh, maybe you'll bring in more passengers from San Jose who would otherwise fly to San Jose instead, and they prefer San Fran because it's more attractive. Like, is there something like along those lines that you would need to consider as well?
I thought you had said that you're going to use the passengers who aren't spending anything at the airports are now assumed to be going to the gyms and things. I think that's what he means. Like, so that percentage of passengers who are not spending anything on any facilities right now, with those new features, with those new facilities, those passengers are not going to.
Yeah, but there's still like the possibility that the terminal itself is more attractive, rather than just attracting existing passengers.
Yeah, I think if I understand what you're saying, I think somebody else kind of mentioned something along these lines earlier. There was actually another aspect of the case that I was kind of hoping we would get to. I think if we had more time, we definitely would have gotten to it, but just because of time constraints, we didn't get to it, which was kind of like, we were kind of looking at all these numbers, assuming the same number of passengers. But I think one of the other things that would have been also interesting to explore is, will there be new passengers using SFO as opposed to San Jose or LAX or wherever else they may have been going to transit? And then how would that affect kind of the revenues across?
Is it always some sort of like financial analysis like this? Like you're trying to like calculate profit, cost. Is there sometimes like more like a non-financial component?
I'd say not all cases are financial and profit, although I would say probably 80 to 90% are. But the other 10% to 20%, I'd say, for example, a case could have been, there's like one of the prominent organ donations case, right? So for example, a hospital wants to think about more ways for more organ donation to its hospitals, right? That could be a very valid case, and they ask you how would you think about strategies to get the word out there for more people to donate organs? And that has nothing to do with cost or financial. But although I would say from my personal experiences, through all the interviews I've done, 80 to 90% are somewhat related to money. Yeah. Okay, so so I think that's a great list of questions. And in the end, if you have more questions, you can ask me. I just kind of wanted to, hopefully you guys all signed the sheet. So actually what I've done is, I recently founded a Case Prep Master, which is www.caseprepmaster.com, which is a website that offers these materials for free. Most of them are free for free. That allows you to be more strategic on how to say solve the case interview, write your resume, things of that nature. And one of our products is kind of a package of 9 videos, 9 training videos on like real candidates doing a real case like this, and then us commenting on kind of what is the good part that the candidate did versus the bad. So you can look into it if you're interested. So yeah, so that's kind of that's about it.